The laughter started with Richard Caldwell, VP of Operations, a sharp bark that cut through the conference room like a blade. 24 executives and department heads joined in, the sound filling Brennan Industries' executive boardroom with cruel amusement at my expense. $2,500, Richard repeated, his voice dripping with mockery as he gestured at the proposal I'd spent 3 months developing. Alexandra, you're asking us to pay $2,500 for what amounts to a spreadsheet with delusions of grandeur. More laughter rippled through the room. I sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table, my laptop open to the presentation I'd barely been allowed to begin, watching 18 months of client relationship building evaporate in real time. The proposal on my screen represented a breakthrough in inventory optimization that could save Brennan Industries approximately $12 million annually, while reducing waste by 43%. The mathematics were elegant, the implementation straightforward, and the return on investment astronomical. But to Richard Caldwell and his audience of sycophantic executives, it was apparently hilarious. "Mr. Caldwell," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the humiliation burning in my chest, "perhaps I could explain the algorithmic approach in more detail. The cost savings potential." "We don't need fairy tales about magical algorithms," he interrupted, waving his hand dismissively. "What we need are real solutions from serious vendors, not toy projects from boutique consultants." The room erupted in fresh laughter. Several executives were actually wiping tears from their eyes, as if my 3 months of intensive development work was the funniest joke they'd heard all year. CEO Margaret Brennan, seated at the head of the table like a queen holding court, didn't laugh but smiled with cold amusement. "Alexandra," she said, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but Brennan Industries operates at a different scale than you're accustomed to. We implement solutions worth millions, not thousands." The dismissal was complete and public. I closed my laptop with deliberate calm, gathered my materials, and stood to leave while 24 executives continued their amusement at my expense. "Thank you for your time," I said, my voice carrying none of the fury building in my chest. "I'll explore other opportunities for this solution." What I didn't tell them, what they were too arrogant to consider, was that Brennan Industries wasn't the only company in their market sector. What they just rejected as a toy project was about to become their competitors' most devastating competitive advantage. My name is Alexandra Morrison, and for 18 months I'd worked as an independent consultant for Brennan Industries, developing process improvements that had saved them over $30 million. This afternoon, they'd laughed at my most innovative solution and dismissed me like an amateur. By next quarter, they would discover exactly how expensive that laughter had been. The drive back to my home office took me through downtown Seattle's business district, past Glass Tower's housing companies that competed with Brennan Industries for market dominance. I'd researched every one of them during my months of client development, understanding their strengths, weaknesses, and strategic priorities. What Richard Caldwell and Margaret Brennan didn't understand was that innovative solutions don't become less valuable when rejected by arrogant executives. They become available to smarter competitors. My home office occupied the converted attic of my Queen Anne Victorian, walls lined with whiteboards covered in algorithmic equations and process flow diagrams. This was where I'd developed the inventory optimization system that Brennan Industries had just dismissed as a $2,500 joke. The system was elegant in its simplicity. By analyzing purchase patterns, seasonal variations, supplier reliability, and demand fluctuations through machine learning algorithms, it could predict optimal inventory levels with 94% accuracy. Implementation required no new hardware, no complex software installations, just integration with existing inventory management systems. For Brennan Industries, with their $800 million in annual revenue and notoriously inefficient inventory management, it would have been transformative. $12 million in annual savings, 43% waste reduction, and competitive advantages that would have extended their market leadership for years. But they'd laughed at the price tag and missed the value proposition entirely. I pulled up my client research files, specifically the competitive analysis I'd developed during my initial engagement with Brennan. Their 3 largest competitors each faced similar inventory challenges, but unlike Brennan's leadership, they hadn't demonstrated a pattern of arrogant dismissal toward innovative solutions. Meridian Technologies, Brennan's fiercest rival, had been gaining market share through aggressive efficiency improvements. Their CEO, David Park, was known for recognizing value regardless of its source or price point. I drafted an email to David Park's office, requesting a meeting to discuss inventory optimization solutions that could provide significant competitive advantages. I attached nothing about my previous work with Brennan Industries, nothing that could be construed as proprietary information sharing. just a professional consultant offering a novel solution to a market-leading company. The response came within 4 hours. Mr. Park would be happy to meet Friday afternoon to discuss innovative approaches to operational efficiency. Friday arrived with Seattle's typical autumn rain, but David Park's corner office at Meridian Technologies was flooded with natural light from floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. He greeted me personally, unusual for a CEO but indicative of his hands-on management style. "Miss Morrison," he said, settling into a chair across from me rather than behind his imposing desk, "I'm always interested in innovative solutions, especially from consultants with your reputation for delivering measurable results." My reputation? I'd built it through 5 years of developing process improvements that actually worked, solutions that saved clients money and improved operations rather than just generating consulting fees. "Mr. Park," I began, spreading my materials across his conference table, "I've developed an inventory optimization system that could provide significant competitive advantages for a company with Meridian's scale and ambition." I launched into the presentation that Brennan Industries had barely allowed me to begin, explaining the algorithmic approach, the implementation process, and the projected results. David Park listened with the attention of someone who understood that innovation often comes from unexpected sources. 43% waste reduction, he said, studying my projected savings calculations. That would represent approximately $18 million annually for our operation. The numbers were even better for Meridian than they would have been for Brennan, due to their slightly larger inventory footprint and less efficient current systems. "What's your implementation timeline?" Park asked. 6 weeks for full deployment, assuming access to your current inventory management data and cooperation from your operations team, and your fee structure. For the basic system, $2,500 plus implementation costs. For exclusive licensing that would prevent competitors from using the same optimization approach, considerably more. Park leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "How much more? That depends on how much competitive advantage is worth to Meridian Technologies." Over the next hour, we discussed not just the technical specifications of my inventory optimization system, but its strategic implications. In the wrong hands, it could eliminate Meridian's market advantages. In their hands, it could create insurmountable competitive barriers. The exclusive licensing discussion that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced with Brennan Industries. Where Richard Caldwell had dismissed the solution as worthless, David Park recognized it as potentially game-changing. Where Margaret Brennan had questioned my competence, Park was calculating the value of keeping this innovation away from his competitors. "Miss Morrison," he said finally, "I'm prepared to offer you something unprecedented. Full exclusive licensing for your inventory optimization system, plus consulting fees for implementation and ongoing development, plus equity participation in the efficiency gains it generates." The number he named made my breath catch. $74 million for exclusive rights, implementation, and ongoing development partnership. $74 million. For the solution that Brennan Industries had dismissed as a $2,500 joke. "Mr. Park," I said, managing to keep my voice steady, "I accept your offer." The signing ceremony took place the following Wednesday in Meridian Technologies' executive boardroom, with their full legal team documenting the most expensive technology acquisition in the company's history. Local business media covered the announcement, noting that Meridian had secured exclusive rights to breakthrough inventory optimization technology. The implementation began immediately. My system was integrated into Meridian's operations within 5 weeks, ahead of schedule and under budget. The results exceeded even my projections. Within the first quarter, Meridian achieved 47% waste reduction and cost savings that reached $21 million. More importantly, the efficiency gains allowed them to offer pricing that their competitors couldn't match while maintaining higher profit margins. The market response was swift and devastating for Meridian's rivals. Client after client switched to Meridian Technologies, drawn by superior pricing, faster delivery, and inventory availability that seemed almost prescient. Brennan Industries, still operating with their notoriously inefficient inventory systems, couldn't compete. Their costs remained high, their waste continued, and their market share began eroding as clients migrated to Meridian's superior service. The industry publications picked up the story within 6 months. Meridian Technologies disrupts market through revolutionary efficiency gains, proclaimed Supply Chain Management Today. The article detailed how Meridian had achieved unprecedented inventory optimization, creating competitive advantages that were reshaping entire market segments. What the article didn't mention, what none of the industry coverage revealed, was that this revolutionary technology had been offered to Brennan Industries for $2,500 and dismissed with laughter. Richard Caldwell called me 8 months after the Meridian announcement. Alexandra, he said, his voice carefully controlled, I've been following Meridian's efficiency improvements. Their inventory optimization is remarkably similar to concepts you presented to us last year. It's similar because it's the same system, I replied. The one your team found so amusing. There was a long silence. Alexandra, if you developed this system while consulting for Brennan Industries, we might have intellectual property claims. You might, if you'd actually purchased the system when it was offered. Since you dismissed it as worthless and terminated our consulting relationship, I was free to develop it independently and license it to more appreciative clients. But you presented it to us first. That establishes prior art potential ownership claims. I presented a proposal that you rejected with public mockery. The system I licensed to Meridian was developed independently, documented thoroughly, and legally protected. If you'd like to discuss licensing arrangements for a non-exclusive version, my rates have increased significantly. How significantly? Given that Meridian paid $74 million for exclusive rights, non-exclusive licensing would be approximately half that amount. The silence that followed was profound. Through my office windows, I could see Seattle's skyline, including the Brennan Industries building where Richard Caldwell was probably calculating how his $2,500 mistake had become a $37 million problem. $74 million, he said finally. $74 million, I confirmed, for the toy project that wasn't worth serious consideration. Alexandra, we need to discuss this situation. The board is asking difficult questions about why we passed on technology that's destroying our competitive position. The board should ask why their executives dismiss innovative solutions based on price tags rather than value propositions. After I ended the call, I leaned back in my chair and contemplated the view. 18 months earlier, I'd walked into Brennan Industries with hopes of building a long-term consulting relationship. I'd imagined helping them optimize their operations, improve their efficiency, and strengthen their market position. Instead, they'd taught me that arrogance and mockery were poor substitutes for strategic thinking. The quarterly reports that followed confirmed what market observers had been noting for months. Meridian Technologies' efficiency gains were accelerating their market dominance, while their competitors struggled with obsolete operational models. Brennan Industries' stock price had dropped 28%, as investors recognized that their inventory inefficiencies made them non-competitive in a market where Meridian could offer superior pricing and service. Margaret Brennan, the CEO who'd smiled coldly while dismissing my proposal, had been replaced by the board of directors in an effort to address what they called strategic challenges in operational efficiency. Richard Caldwell, the VP who'd led the laughter at my $2,500 proposal, had been reassigned to business development roles that kept him away from operational decisions. The annual Supply Chain Innovation Conference that fall provided the perfect venue for demonstrating how completely the industry landscape had changed. I was invited to deliver the keynote address on breakthrough optimization technologies, while Meridian Technologies sponsored the entire event as recognition of their market leadership. During my presentation, I discussed the development of machine learning approaches to inventory management, the importance of recognizing value regardless of its source, and the competitive advantages that come from implementing innovative solutions quickly. I never mentioned Brennan Industries by name, but everyone in the audience understood the subtext. The company that had been industry leaders 18 months earlier was now struggling to survive in a market transformed by technology they dismissed as worthless. The Q&A session that followed was remarkable for its focus on lessons learned from competitive displacement. Dr. Morrison, one audience member asked, what advice would you give to companies that want to avoid being disrupted by innovations they don't recognize? My advice would be to evaluate solutions based on their potential value rather than their price tags, I said. Some of the most transformative innovations come from unexpected sources and don't require massive investments. The companies that thrive are those that recognize value quickly and implement improvements before their competitors do. Another question came from a CEO whose company had been watching Meridian's rise with concern. How can established companies identify breakthrough technologies before they become competitive disadvantages? Listen to all proposals seriously, regardless of their source or initial cost. The $2,500 solution that seems trivial today might become the $74 million competitive advantage that defines tomorrow's market leaders. The applause that followed felt like vindication for every consultant who'd ever been dismissed by arrogant executives who confused price with value. That evening, at the conference reception, I was approached by dozens of executives wanting to understand how their companies could avoid Brennan Industries' fate. Many shared stories of dismissed innovations, rejected proposals, and competitive disruptions that had blindsided their organizations. But the conversation that mattered most came from David Park himself, who'd flown in specifically to attend my keynote presentation. "Alexandra," he said, raising his glass in a private toast, "18 months ago you offered us the opportunity to transform our industry position. Today, we're market leaders because we recognized value that our competitors missed. Thank you for choosing the right partner for your innovation." 2 years after that humiliating laughter in Brennan Industries' boardroom, the transformation was complete. Meridian Technologies had achieved market dominance through efficiency advantages that their competitors couldn't match. The inventory optimization system had generated over $100 million in additional revenue while reducing operational costs by unprecedented amounts. But beyond the financial success, I'd proven something fundamental about the relationship between innovation recognition and competitive advantage. When companies dismiss valuable solutions because of arrogant assumptions about price and source, they create opportunities for smarter competitors to gain insurmountable advantages. The $74 million I'd received for exclusive licensing rights had provided financial security that extended far beyond traditional consulting fees. More importantly, the industry recognition had established me as a developer of breakthrough solutions rather than just another process improvement consultant. Brennan Industries eventually filed for bankruptcy protection, unable to compete in a market where their operational inefficiencies made profitability impossible. The company that had laughed at my $2,500 proposal had been destroyed by their refusal to recognize its value. Richard Caldwell had disappeared from the industry entirely, his LinkedIn profile showing only vague references to strategic consulting without current clients or testimonials. Margaret Brennan had reinvented herself as a business school lecturer, teaching courses on strategic management to students who would presumably learn from her expensive mistakes about recognizing innovation. But the most satisfying vindication came from watching Meridian Technologies continue to dominate markets where Brennan Industries had once been leaders. Every quarterly report confirmed that efficiency advantages compound over time, creating competitive barriers that become impossible to overcome. The inventory optimization system that had been dismissed as a toy project had become the foundation for sustained market dominance worth billions in market capitalization. 3 years after the laughter in that Brennan Industries boardroom, I received an invitation that completed the circle. Harvard Business School was developing a case study about competitive disruption through operational innovation, using the Brennan Meridian transformation as their primary example. The case study would be taught to MBA students as an illustration of how established market leaders can be displaced when they fail to recognize breakthrough innovations from unexpected sources. As I prepared for the Harvard interviews, I thought about the journey from humiliating rejection to industry recognition. Richard Caldwell's laughter had been intended to dismiss my work and assert his superior judgment. Instead, it had motivated me to find partners who understood value when they saw it. The case study interviews were conducted in Harvard's executive conference rooms, with business school professors documenting every aspect of the innovation development, the rejection process, and the competitive transformation that followed. Professor Sarah Chen led the discussion, asking detailed questions about the technological development, the client relationship dynamics, and the strategic implications of Meridian's acquisition. "Dr. Morrison," she said, "this case represents one of the most dramatic competitive reversals we've documented. A $2,500 proposal rejected by market leaders becomes a $74 million competitive weapon for their primary rival." The numbers tell the story, I agreed, but the real lesson is about how organizations evaluate innovation. Brennan Industries judged my proposal by its price rather than its potential. Meridian Technologies recognized transformative value regardless of its initial cost. What advice would you give to executives facing similar innovation evaluation decisions? Listen to all proposals seriously, regardless of their source, price, or initial appearance. The most disruptive innovations often come from unexpected places and don't require massive investments. The companies that thrive are those that recognize value quickly and act on it before their competitors do. The Harvard case study was published 6 months later, becoming required reading for strategic management courses at business schools across the country. Students learned about the Brennan Industries collapse as an example of how arrogance and poor judgment can destroy market leadership. But more importantly, they learned about Meridian Technologies' rise as an example of how recognizing and implementing breakthrough innovations creates sustainable competitive advantages. The annual Competitive Strategy Conference that fall featured the Harvard case study prominently, with both Professor Chen and David Park presenting the Meridian Transformation as a masterclass in strategic innovation adoption. I was invited to participate in the panel discussion, sharing insights about innovation development and the importance of finding partners who understand value creation. During the presentation, Professor Chen noted that the Brennan-Meridian case had become one of the most studied examples of competitive disruption in modern business education. The $2,500 proposal that seemed trivial to established market leaders, she explained to the audience, became the foundation for their complete displacement. Students learned that evaluating innovations requires strategic thinking rather than superficial judgments. As I listened to academic analysis of what had become my career-defining project, I reflected on how completely the narrative had changed. The laughter that had been intended to humiliate me had become a cautionary tale about the dangers of dismissing breakthrough solutions. The toy project that wasn't worth serious consideration had become a case study in recognizing transformative value. Richard Caldwell's mockery had been preserved in business school curricula as an example of how not to evaluate innovations. Margaret Brennan's cold dismissal had become a teaching moment about the relationship between arrogance and strategic failure. But David Park's recognition and $74 million investment had become the gold standard for how smart companies identify and implement competitive advantages. 5 years after that conference room laughter, the transformation was complete and permanent. Meridian Technologies dominated markets where Brennan Industries had once been leaders. The efficiency advantages created by my inventory optimization system had compounded into insurmountable competitive barriers. The system that had been dismissed as worthless had generated over $500 million in competitive advantages, establishing market dominance that would likely persist for decades. But beyond the financial impact and market transformation, I'd proven something fundamental about innovation recognition and strategic thinking. When executives confuse price with value, arrogance with